when we gaze into the abyss. The abyss.
If there's something that can be said about Love and Deepspace, is that the writing in this game is always very deliberate, meaning that the inclusion of one of Nietzsche's most iconic quotes is no coincidence, and certainly was not put there only for flavor. But what exactly connects a character like Sylus and the German philosopher Nietzsche across time and medium, and what commentary can they provide us about the topics of power and greed? Greed and desire have always carried negative connotations, labeled as selfish and shameful, something to eradicate to achieve purity and elevate the spirit above the materialistic world. Greed has been explored in both philosophy and literature, with works like Dante's Divine Comedy, which depicts the consequences of excessive desire through the tormented souls in hell, or Shakespeare's exploration of greed in The Merchant of Venice, and his call for temperance through the tragic story of Romeo and Juliet. The moral teaching of many religions oppose desire, while greed is viewed as the tyrannical manifestation of a soul dominated by bottomless appetites. In this regard, Sylus is a fascinating character. Not only is he a well-written and layered character in his own right, but through him there is a captivating and nuanced exploration of the themes of greed and desire. In his myth, we see how dragons are feared and hunted by humans because of their innate ability to perceive and fuel human desires. On the one hand, the sanctuary serves as a religious pillar embodying an Augustinian perspective on greed, where desire is seen as a cardinal sin. Yearning for material wealth represents a disordered love that prioritizes the temporal over the spiritual, ultimately endangering the individual's soul. The contrast between the sanctuary and the dragons underscores the deep-seated fear that the religious institution may harbor toward perceived threats to their doctrinal authority. Research supports this tendency, showing that the religious belief can sometimes foster antisocial or hostile behavior toward those labeled as outsiders. The other becomes a symbolic monster that must be vanquished. Within the sanctuary's rigid moral framework, even the most benign desires are cast as dangerous deviations, prompting harsh discipline and encouraging internalized shame. Unfortunately, the harder the restrictions, the greater the disruption that will result. And indeed, through this story, we witness the full extent of human hypocrisy, where some priests hoard treasures and resources, while humanity fights itself, killing innocents in the name of a holy war.
Humans don't need fiends. Their own fear is enough to bring about the world's end.
In this climate, Sylus is made the scapegoat. All the repressed and shameful desires people harbor are projected onto him as the fiend who corrupts the human mind, without realizing that they are the ones doing it to themselves. Sylus himself says that people only see what they want to see in him, while MC seems to be the only one who doesn't see him as a monster. The sanctuary and its people become a mirror to Sylus, where he is made to reflect what they fear the most, and through their persecution, they end up creating the very same monster they fear. In his book, Beyond Good and Evil, philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche writes, "He who fights with monsters might take care lest he thereby become a monster, and if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you." His words can be interpreted in many ways, but in this context, they point out how in their pursuit of a moral taken without question, people never looked inward, and instead chased monsters, until the ugliness they had inside manifested the real monster. It's important to remember that dragons can feed only on willing souls, meaning that people have been facing all along the consequences of their greedy sins by voluntarily offering their own souls. At the heart of both Sylus and Nietzsche lies a rejection of conventional morality. Although Nietzsche recognized a certain value in religions, especially as the glue that held society together, he criticized traditional Christian values, condemning herd morality, self-denial, and the glorification of suffering. He saw Christianity as weak, a fabrication that mistook impotence with virtue, and functioned mostly as a collar to keep the powerful from reaching their full potential. Nietzsche's philosophy was undeniably ahead of his time, and was regarded as very controversial as it pushed back against normative perceptions of what good and evil are. It is not surprising, then, that some of his ideas' fundamental elements were distilled into one of the morally grey and most successful characters in the game. According to Nietzsche, humanity should strive toward the Übermensch, or Superman, a being who does not follow the flock, nor its moral and traditional beliefs, but has the strength to carve his own path and unapologetically follow his own desires. Sylus fully embodies this philosophy. He does not beg for redemption or justify his actions through moral reasoning, but instead he lives and acts in his own terms. These qualities are likely the result of Sylus' harsh upbringing. He was forced to grow up quickly and faced intense rejection and grief when his people were hunted down. He learned from a young age that the world functioned on a survival of the fittest basis. The trauma led him to harden his heart in order to cope and survive, and he quickly learned that to be able to protect himself and those he cared about, he required strength and willpower, both characteristics that he highly values. His mentality in Beyond Cloudfall reflects the idea that everyone is subjected to the same fundamental harsh rules, where the strong survive while the weak fail. In a world of dog-eat-dog, there's no room for coddling.
Until this mark disappears, you will have 2 more chances to take my life. Prove to me that you can be stronger.
This mentality reflects some of Nietzsche's belief on morality and what his idealized solution was. He questioned the traditional value system and pushed against Christian beliefs that equate luxury with sin and martyrdom with virtue. One shouldn't identify too much with suffering, because it's our constant battle with it that makes life interesting. In Nietzsche's eyes, struggling becomes fundamental to pushing the limits and improving oneself. And when Nietzsche declared, "What is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil," he gestured toward a morality driven not by imposed codes, but by our passions and inner compass. The Übermensch transcends inherited values and creates new ones, forged from personal will and vision. In the same way, Sylus doesn't follow rules, but rather he writes his own. He is not concerned about what others think of him, nor does he care about societal norms. He himself decides what and who is important to him. Sylus reflects many of these principles, by showing immense willpower and fully engaging with life's pleasures and hardships alike. His way of living is marked by intense selfishness, raw passion, and aggressive boldness. He thrives in the challenges he faces, up to the point that he finds weak adversaries boring, and he chases the thrill of a good battle. He's pragmatic, practical, and not overly concerned with pleasing others or with putting up with what he perceives as weakness or inefficiency. Although Nietzsche values strength and thought of the ideal man as someone capable of strategic selfishness who can act with aggressiveness when required, his teachings are not to be mistaken as him saying that we shouldn't care for the weak. This is mirrored in Sylus' protective side and caretaking tendencies. There are several instances where we can see this warmer and caring side shine. For example, in Beyond Cloudfall, he tries to cheer MC up when she's sad. He feeds stray cats and takes care of an injured dove when asked by MC. He takes pride in empowering those he loves, and one of his ways of showing it is by donning the mantle of mentorship and making sure that they have the tools and knowledge to defend themselves. This is most evident when he takes under his wing Luke and Kieran, and acts as a mentor figure in both the innocent birdcage and captivating lesson, when he teaches boxing to MC. Although Sylus values strength, he is never unnecessarily cruel, and never uses his strength to crush those who are weaker than him. For Sylus, power is important when it comes to protecting himself and, more importantly, those he cares about. In Nietzsche's philosophy, strength is not necessarily translated as muscle or power, but it's a broader term meant to indicate the strength to embrace life as it is. Sylus incarnates the will to power, which is not meant as a despotic strength and dominance over others, but power to assert one way of life and control over oneself. Control is indeed central to Sylus' character. It is not the type of stifling control that curbs everything perceived out of order, and neither is the neurotic self-control of a character like Zane, who is afraid of losing his grip on himself. Sylus' control is about acceptance. He knows himself, and he is not afraid to gaze into the abyss and look at the ugly parts. After all, he is well acquainted with the ugliness of humanity. Why should he shy away from his own? By being honest about who he is and what he wants, he can overcome himself, face his flaws, and be in full control. It's by admitting our feelings and wants that we become masters of them, instead of being enslaved to them. We can see this control in how Sylus shows up in intimacy. He knows what he wants and he knows he desires MC, and being comfortable with his more primal desires and his sexuality allows him to be in full control of himself. He appreciates the sorceress for the same reasons. She is passionate, fierce, and the only one who is able to admit her desires and be honest with her needs.
I like your eyes. They are beautiful. In them, I can see your hatred, defiance, and greed for life.
However, in the same way Sylus was shunned for being different, when the sorceress shows a small desire, something that goes against the principle of selflessness of her creed, it's seen as the seed of evil, something threatening the status quo that needs to be eradicated. She is banished and hunted, as often women are, even nowadays, shamed for having needs and desires. Whether through motherhood or being a housewife, women were always asked to be caregivers, and thus to put aside their own desires to care for others. The duty and role society decided for women acted for the longest time and often still act as shackles. When it comes to sexual desires, women are still nowadays mostly shamed and condemned for showing any kind of physical need. Vestige of the still thriving Madonna-Wh complex, women are dichotomized into rigid categories of either the pure angelic being or the promiscuous seductress and whore. It does not come as a surprise that so many women tend to gravitate toward a character like Sylus, a man who not only accepts the sorceress for who she is, but encourages her to embrace her desires without shame or pretense. It is liberating to feel allowed to want and have needs, to shed the shameful feelings that chain us to external values that are not necessarily ours. In Chinese, the word for a sorceress is more accurately translated as witch, spiritually nearer to the witches who were burned at the stake and considered a threat to Christian morality. They were free and thus had to bear the resentment and projected fear of those who restrained themselves by denying their own truths. Seen once again as dangerous seductresses and daughters of Lilith, whose purpose was to deviate pious men into sin. After all, for those men, it was much easier to shove responsibility onto someone else, rather than having to confront their own inner conflicts and desires. Nietzsche's view on women was also ahead of his time. He was sympathetic towards them, as he recognized the absurd paradox of society's expectations. The total lack of sexual education, paired with a constructed ignorance of all sexual matters as part of a supposed feminine honor, contrasted with how, once married, women were faced with the expectation of a sexual life without any preparation, and were demanded to partake in what they were taught to consider vulgar and taboo. On the other hand, with Sylus there's an open invitation to embrace one's desires. He gives the space to freely express them without any shame or judgment. He encourages MC to embrace all sides of herself fully, even those deemed less appropriate by society, and invites her to take space and leave her mark on the world. With him, MC is free to be her true, authentic self, without any masks. Sylus breathes new life into many ideas explored by Nietzsche, and together they suggest the idea that greed, when stripped of shame, might be less a sin than a symptom of the will to live more fully. Not something to condemn, but something to confront, a hunger to shape the world rather than be shaped by it. In Nietzsche's philosophy, desires are considered to be healthy and essential, but only when channeled toward creative and life-affirming actions. Greed, however, is a distortion of the will to power, where material accumulation takes center stage over growth and self-overcoming. This relationship between healthy desires and greed has been explored by many philosophers over the centuries. According to Aristotle's idea of golden mean, there's always a need for balance between extremes. Desires are what drive life forward. They can be a powerful, positive, creative force, but too much of them and you become a slave to your lowest impulses. Too little and everything becomes stagnant and stale. It's no wonder that Philo's society, built around suppressing all needs, was always destined to fall. On the other side of the same coin, too much indulgence can lead to ruin, and Sylus' myth also functions as a warning on the consequences of unchecked desires. It's no coincidence that as a dragon, Sylus' curse is to be consumed by overwhelming desires. It's a frenzy of lust without thought or reason, and it's this surrender to this madness that terrifies him more than anything. The deeper his love and longing for the sorceress grows, and the more she returns those feelings, the more his grip on sanity unravels. His curse pulls him toward madness, and the echoing nature of MC's resonant power only intensifies it. His hunger feeds hers, and hers feeds his, like two serpents locked in a desperate attempt to consume one another. According to Nietzsche, love is far from the manifestation of a pure sentiment, but it's inextricably bound up in the experience of greed and lust for possession. He defines it as an ingenuous expression of egoism, despite it being associated with moral goodness. Love can manifest as an urge to possess, to assimilate. When you lose control, love can easily become twisted, a desire to consume and be consumed, to lose yourself completely in another. In his book The Gay Science, Nietzsche writes, "Our love of our neighbor, is it not a striving after new property? And similarly our love of knowledge, of truth, and in general all the striving after novelties, we gradually become satiated with the old and securely possessed, and again stretch out our hands. Even the finest landscape in which we live for 3 months is no longer certain of our love, and any kind of more distant coast excites our covetousness. The possession, for the most part, becomes smaller through possessing. The love of the sexes, however, betrays itself most plainly as the striving after possession. The lover wants the unconditioned, sole possession of the person longed for by him. He wants just absolute power over her soul as over her body. He wants to be loved solely, and to dwell and rule in the other soul as what is highest and most to be desired. When one considers that this means precisely to exclude all the world from a precious possession, a happiness and an enjoyment, when one considers that the lover has in view the impoverishment and privation of all other rivals, and would like to become the dragon of his golden hoard, as the most inconsiderate and selfish of all conquerors conquerors and exploiters, when one considers finally that to the lover himself the whole world besides appear indifferent, colorless and wordless, and that he is ready to make every sacrifice, disturb every arrangement, and put every other interest behind his own, one is verily surprised that this ferocious lust of property and justice of sexual love should have been glorified and deified to such an extent at all times. Yes, that out of this love the conception of love as the antithesis of egoism should have been derived, when it is perhaps precisely the most unqualified expression of egoism. Nietzsche described the lovers as the dragon guarding his golden hoard, treating their beloved as a bird in a golden cage. In his view, the comforting embrace of a lover masks the chains that come with that kind of attachment. When Sylus is dysregulated, his love turns toward a desire to consume and possess. Love, at its most twisted and perverted form, is an act of cannibalism, a ravenous need to devour and possess all of the other entirely, an impulse to engulf the other, to erase separation and fuse into a single, inseparable entity. In Kafka's writing, the lovers are described as dogs who tear at each other's bodies, desperate to find something and yet never fully satisfied. They are described as animalistic, and the act of love as passionate and violent. In Innocent Birdcage, we can see that Sylus is scared of losing MC, and fears that she will eventually leave him. In the bad ending, his fear of losing her and his desire to keep her to himself take over completely, and they are twisted in an obsessive need for possession.
No, you'll never fly away, my little bird.
In the main timeline, we find that Sylus has come to terms with his nature, and has found his own balance and ways to redirect his desires in healthy ways, so that they cannot control his fate and he can embrace love with open arms. Throughout all the game, it's present a constant search for balance between extremes. We can see it in how Taros City and Ivory City are perfect opposites. The same way the N109 zone is the opposite of Lincoln City. The sorceress comes from the opposite world of Sylus. She is meant to be his arch-nemesis, the same way MC is a hunter and Sylus a criminal lord. Light and shadows, two opposite halves that make a whole, and balance is found in the middle. In Chinese philosophy, yin and yang are fundamental concepts of complementary duality. They are opposing forces that perfectly mirror and balance each other out. They are opposite, but perpetually attracted toward one another, in an eternal chase for harmony and balance. This eternal research mirrors Sylus' search for MC through the tapestry of time, and it's a callback to Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence. In Nietzsche's philosophy, the eternal recurrence is the perpetual return of all things, and only an individual with exceptional willpower as the Superman is capable of withstanding this truth, of embracing life enthusiastically, and welcoming the eternal repetition of everything that has happened and will happen. The story offers a glimpse into parallel timelines and universes, unfolding in an infinite loop that intertwines the past, present, and future into a circular narrative. In a similar way to Nietzsche's Superman, Sylus is capable of embracing the eternal recurrence. If reality is meant to loop endlessly onto itself, he is ready to embrace it all, and each and every time he always chooses MC. Even love is not linear. In the other we recognize the love that can be, the love that will be, and the love that it was. Love is woven into the fabric of the universe, and it has no beginning and no end. It echoes and ripples through time, and every choice, every step we take brings us back to who we were always meant to love. Sylus, despite the pain of parting with MC and meeting her in another life as a different person, keeps openly embracing his love for her.
We part and meet again and again. Heavy hearts with little laid bare. The weight in my chest is hard to name, while your doubts fill the air. How can I witness and hold such beauty once more, if I were to bury my heart within your sweet lips?
This courage to love and embrace everything that comes with it, both joy and pain, is reflected in his character design. As a dragon, hard scales cover his body. He has sharp claws and horns. All of his body is a weapon, and yet his chest is left bare and vulnerable. It's a deliberate choice that speaks of his openness in letting MC in embracing both the love and the pain that inevitably comes with it. To open up to love means accepting the pain of separation, but without pain and darkness, we would not be able to recognize the light and appreciate our moments of joy. Sylus knows this, and he welcomes his feelings for MC, the same way she willingly decides to save his life instead of taking it. Despite being meant to be an arch-nemesis, they both deliberately decide to become soulmates instead. In every lifetime, in every universe, they keep finding each other and falling in love, keep orbiting around one another's life, following each other's footsteps and adjusting to the other's rhythm. After all, this was a dance always meant for two.